Imagine boarding a flight, and moments after takeoff, the plane starts nosediving. Not because of a storm, not because of the pilots, but because of a hidden software system no one told you about. This isn't a nightmare scenario. It happened twice with the Boeing 737 MAX, killing 346 people. How did one of the world's most trusted aerospace companies let this happen? This is the story of MCAS, the system that turned Boeing's crown jewel into a symbol of tragedy. In 2010, Airbus made a bold move. They announced a new jet, the A320neo. It was faster, cheaper, and used significantly less fuel. Airlines were excited. It could save them millions. Boeing suddenly had a big problem. For years, their 737 ruled the skies. But now Airbus was stealing the spotlight. Boeing had to act fast. They had two choices: build a brand new plane, which could take 10 years and billions of dollars, or take the old 737 and just upgrade it. They chose speed. In 2011, Boeing announced the 737 MAX. It would have better fuel efficiency and be ready in 6 years. Best of all, they promised airlines it would fly so similarly that pilots wouldn't need new training. But there was a hidden cost. To save fuel, Boeing added bigger engines. But the 737 wasn't built for that. The new engines didn't fit under the wing, so engineers moved them forward and higher. That changed how the plane flew. It now tended to tilt upward too much. So Boeing added something called MCAC, a software system that would automatically push the nose down if it thought the plane was climbing too steeply. On the surface, it looked like a smart fix, but there was one major problem. MCAS relied on just one sensor. If that sensor provided incorrect information, the system could cause the plane to dive. Boeing was under massive pressure. Their biggest customer, Southwest Airlines, had already ordered 150 planes, and Boeing promised the 737 MAX would be ready by 2017. Behind the scenes, engineers felt rushed. Some even warned that the design might not be safe. But those warnings didn't stop the launch. The MAX was too important. The single-aisle jet market made up 70% of all plane sales. Boeing couldn't afford to lose ground to Airbus. By 2016, the first 737 MAX rolled out. Boeing called it their best plane ever. Airlines loved that they didn't need to retrain their pilots, but that decision, the one to skip simulator training, would soon have tragic consequences. No one knew it yet, but the 737 MAX had a deadly flaw. A flaw was hidden in its software. In their race to beat Airbus, Boeing made a choice, and the world would pay the price. Boeing added MCAS to the 737 MAX to correct a new problem. The plane's larger engines made it more likely to pitch upward, especially during takeoff. MCAS was supposed to fix that by automatically pushing the nose down if it sensed too steep a climb. On paper, it seemed like a smart solution. In reality, it was terrifying. The system could override the pilots. They were battling a force they didn't even know existed. There was no warning saying MCAS is active. Just vague alerts. After the Lion Air Flight 610 crash, many pilots admitted they'd never even heard of MCAS. Only then did the truth start to surface. Inside Boeing, some engineers raised concerns. One test pilot said the system was egregious. But Boeing made no changes. They were in a race with Airbus and couldn't afford to fall behind. To avoid extra safety checks, Boeing told regulators MCAS was a minor update. The FAA accepted that. One Boeing pilot, Mark Faulkner, tested the system, but his warnings went ignored. So when Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 went down, it was the same pattern. By the time Boeing fixed the software, the damage was done. 2 crashes, hundreds dead, and a reputation for safety was shattered in front of the world. It was supposed to be a routine flight. Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta on October 29, 2018. A brand new Boeing 737 MAX, just 800 hours in the air. 13 minutes later, it was gone. The jet plunged into the Java Sea, killing all 189 people on board. At first, no one had answers, but the investigation uncovered something chilling. A small sensor outside the plane gave bad data. It told the computer the nose was too high. So the MCAS system kicked in. It pushed the nose down. The pilots pulled back. But MCAS activated again, 26 times in 11 minutes. The crew didn't know what was happening. There was no alert saying MCAS is active. No mention of it in the manual. No training. They followed the emergency checklist. It didn't work. MCAS kept taking over. After the crash, Boeing systems didn't flag it as a safety issue. It told airlines how to disable MCAS. The FAA said the MAX could keep flying as long as crews followed new procedures. Some filed lawsuits. Some demanded criminal charges. Most passengers were migrant workers heading home. Their families wanted justice. But Boeing changed nothing. Indonesia's report blamed poor maintenance, Boeing's secrecy, and weak oversight. Boeing stood by the MAX, said it was safe. 5 months later, it happened again. On March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa with 157 people on board. 6 minutes later, the Boeing 737 MAX slammed into the ground at full speed. No one survived. It was the second deadly crash involving the MAX in just 5 months. The cause? MCAS. Just like with Lion Air, a single faulty sensor gave bad data. MCAS believed the nose was too high, so it forced the plane downward. This time, the world didn't wait. Within 24 hours, China grounded its entire MAX fleet. Europe, Australia, and others followed, but the FAA insisted the plane was safe. For 3 days, the US stood alone. Critics accused the FAA of being too close to Boeing. Behind the scenes, Boeing had already been working on a fix since the Lion Air crash, but it still wasn't ready. And now, the truth was leaking out. For the first time in history, countries grounded a US-certified plane before the FAA did. Trust in American aviation oversight collapsed. Canada released satellite data showing the same flight pattern in both crashes. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Boeing's reputation fell apart. Airlines canceled orders. MAX jets were grounded. Billions were lost. Families sued. Congress launched an investigation. The MAX was grounded for 20 months. Flights canceled, production stopped. The message was clear. This wasn't a fluke. It was a system built to fail. The crisis ended up costing Boeing more than $20 billion. At the center was CEO Dennis Muilenburg. He focused on software fixes but ignored the bigger problem. One engineer, Ed Pearson, said he warned Boeing leadership about serious factory issues, but no one listened. It wasn't just bad software. It was a broken culture. When Congress asked why Boeing didn't ground the MAX after the first crash, or why pilots weren't warned, he had no clear answers. In October 2019, the board stripped him of his chairman title. 2 months later, they fired him. In 2021, Boeing reached a deal with the US Department of Justice to avoid criminal charges. They agreed to pay $2.5 billion, $500 million to families, $1.77 billion to airlines, and $243 million in fines. No executives were charged, families were outraged. Trust in Boeing collapsed. Some pilots refused to fly the MAX. Airlines backed away. Boeing, once a symbol of American engineering, now stood for failure. Its stock didn't fully recover for years. Inside the company, fixing the damage was slow. New safety programs launched, but tensions remained. Quality problems kept appearing. Suppliers were frustrated. Boeing was trying to fix safety while protecting profits. The damage didn't go away. At the core was a deeper problem. Boeing stopped putting engineers first. After the McDonnell-Douglas merger, finance took over. And by the time the cost was clear, it was too late. The 737 MAX disaster became a warning. This is what happens when profits come before safety. In January 2024, Boeing was hit with another nightmare. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 had just reached 16,000 feet when part of the plane suddenly ripped open. A door plug, meant to cover an unused emergency exit, blew out with explosive force. Oxygen masks dropped. Cold air blasted into the cabin. Passengers screamed. The pilots made an emergency landing. No one died. But the hole in the side of the Boeing 737 MAX 9 raised a terrifying question. How did this even happen? The investigation moved fast. 4 bolts were supposed to hold the door plug in place. All 4 were missing. No documentation, no proof they were ever reinstalled after maintenance. Other airlines checked their MAX 9s. They found loose parts too. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It looked like a deeper manufacturing problem. The FAA didn't wait. They grounded all MAX 9s for inspection and launched a full audit of Boeing's production lines. What they found was alarming. Bad record keeping, poor quality checks, and missing approval documents. Boeing couldn't prove design changes to the door plug were even signed off, and this was a part meant to seal passengers inside the plane. As the technical review continued, legal pressure exploded. The Justice Department and FBI opened criminal investigations. The SEC began probing whether Boeing misled investors about safety. Boeing was already under a 2021 deal to avoid prosecution. That agreement was now in jeopardy. Whistleblowers stepped forward again. Lawyers said more than 10 insiders were ready to speak. They claimed problems at Boeing were still being hidden. In March 2024, CEO Dave Calhoun said he would step down. He claimed Boeing needed new leadership. The board removed more executives, but victims' families weren't satisfied. They wanted criminal charges. They said Boeing had broken its promises again. The truth was hard to ignore. After lawsuits, settlements, and billions spent on safety reforms, basic mistakes were still happening. The missing bolts weren't just a mechanical error. They were a warning that Boeing's problems weren't over, and maybe never really ended. The Boeing 737 MAX crisis offers critical lessons for businesses. First, sacrificing safety for profits can have devastating consequences, not just financially, but in human lives. Second, transparency prevents disasters. Boeing's lack of clear communication about MCAS left pilots unprepared. Finally, ethical decision-making must override short-term gains. Companies need systems where employees can voice concerns without fear. While Boeing eventually made changes, the damage was already done. The real cost wasn't just financial. It was 346 lives and a shattered reputation that may never fully recover.